Okay, I have a grand plan for today, so that's why I put it all up on a board, because the way that I like to organize this subject matter is surrounding the concept of virtue and how the definition of virtue changed over time. And we're looking at so many authors all the way from ancient times to modern times that you can get lost in all the details of what they say and their times and so forth, and fail to reflect upon the differences among them and what is happening, what is changing as time goes by. I wanted to say a few more things about Pericles and what he says about democratic virtue, and then move on. You may recall that Pericles, one of the last things I mentioned was that Pericles advised the parents of these dead soldiers to go and have more children, and that this would be a great thing for them to do because it would provide more sons for the state. And that comment of Pericles strikes some people rather hard, that people who have just lost sons would want to go and make more, or even be thinking along those lines. So in the aftermath of that tragedy, it strikes people as cold or hard. But aside from the feeling that it might invoke in people, the idea of producing more people for the main purpose of serving the state and its interests is in itself a striking idea. Okay? And it should lead you to ask the question, what exactly was this democracy really about? The ancient democracy. Was it about the same thing that it is for us today? Probably not, because we don't think in those terms, okay? Really, we reverse the whole relationship between the people and the state, you know? This was a democracy, but people were a part of that larger state, and were encouraged to think that way about themselves, and to think in terms of sacrificing their interests to the interests of the nation as a whole, the state. Whereas, for the most part, today we have the reversal. The state more is in the service of us as individuals and our families and so forth. We see ourselves as the author of the state, the people who created it to serve certain purposes that we have. And though at times we know that we have to defend it and even sacrifice our lives to defend it, we look at that sacrifice as a way of continuing to perpetuate the good relationship that we have with each other and with the state. That is, that it protects our interests, that it protects our personal rights and so forth, and this is why it's worth defending. Okay? But Pericles says that the Athenian people should become lovers of Athens. And the word that he uses is eros, which is like romantic love. Okay? And to admire her, he uses that term, admire her and love her like you would a spouse, more or less. And it was not possible, even in that democracy, for people to consistently do this, but this was the ideal, that they should love their country to that extent, have that passionate love for it, which would make them want to further the interests of their country before their own. And I would just suggest that that notion of virtue eroded over time, okay, and was replaced with a different notion of virtue, and that's what I want to trace today. Remember that the Thebans saw problems with democracy, right? And those problems were things like the majority could become tyrannical, okay, which isn't exactly virtuous. The ignorant would rule, and they wouldn't be able to make good decisions that would help the people as a whole. Demagogues would take over and pull people this way and that way, and there would be class warfare, all of which lots of times was true about the ancient democracy. And because of these things, critics of the ancient democracy said there could be no real virtue. We might have this ideal of national unity and of love of country and so forth, but in a democracy with people being pulled all over the place and the politics of personality and interest oftentimes prevailing, can you possibly really have that virtue? Okay? So critics of that type of democracy said it's likely to be vicious, it's likely to be base, to be low, and not to be able to really achieve that virtue. Well, we might ask ourselves, first of all, why is that virtue important? Is it really important to have that love of country? Okay, what is that good for? What purpose does it serve?
Yes, people believing more in a higher good or something bigger and larger than themselves. People are willing to do things, or if they conceive something as a greater good or the good of other people more than they would do for themselves. And it also brings people together. Just like if there's a war, generally whoever is fighting, even if they're a smaller country, smaller force, if they're fighting for their homeland, or if the force is fighting for a cause they believe in, they will fight more fiercely and tend to win unless they're just massively outnumbered and outgunned.
That love of country, love of one's own always comes into play, almost always comes into play when a nation is attacked, and it serves a very useful purpose of making people defend their territory as effectively as they possibly can. So that's definitely, and that's rather instinctual, unless you hate your country, which does sometimes happen, and then you don't mind if somebody invades it, right? But otherwise, if you love it, or even if it's acceptable and you're safe in it, your instinct is to defend it at all costs, right? So, as you mentioned, it brings people together. It creates unity of purpose. All right. Is there a problem? But why is it always good to have unity of purpose? I mean, I can see why it would be useful if you're under assault. Okay. But is it always useful to have unity of purpose and at that level? Is that a desirable trait necessarily?
Gives the governing body of amnesty to do things like charge people taxes for public services, stuff that education things to do.
Right. So it can lead more effectively. You can do the things that we do when people are unified. Right? And there are different ways to create unity. Okay. Yeah.
And you can also get groupthink, unfortunately. You can drown out the voices of any dissenters or people who are questioning tactics or actions that are going on.
Right. That's the danger of unity. You know, unity is good. Patriotism is good, and it can be very important. But almost anything can be taken to an extreme, right? And there are certain times when a little bit of disunity might help, when if government has a bad idea and it's created an atmosphere of complete unity and obedience, that it might be able to do things that it ought not to do. Okay? So in this country, we've always, tried, with some success, to balance unity and patriotism against independence, personal independence, the independence of being able to question the government and just complain and suggest alternatives and so forth. If you lack unity entirely, you're in trouble as a country. It means that the country is not legitimate. The government is not legitimate. But if you have complete and utter unity on every subject, I think the person who's democratically minded would say there's something wrong too. That you have the potential for that unity to be used wrongly or abused. So Pericles, in his call for that complete unity, that utter love of this country, to the point of adoration, frightened some people. That he is promoting a type of love of country and unity that is so intense that the country can make mistakes and do bad things and still be supported by its citizenry. So critics of this ancient virtue bring that up as a danger that they think needs modified and was modified as time went on. But certainly virtue is important to all of these thinkers, right? Developing some kind of virtue. Now, I put Plato in here, not because you read Plato, but because in the previous class you probably did. And you may remember that Plato believes that the person who has reason is automatically a just person. That the cause of injustice is ignorance. And so if a person is knowledgeable and has reason, he will be just. And the pursuit of philosophy is the pursuit of that reason, that knowledge. Okay? You're smiling. Probably a lot of people are thinking the same thing. That is, a person can know a lot but still be unjust, right? Yeah. Does anybody else agree with that? Okay. So, Socrates and Plato's writing about Socrates, must be assuming that if you follow the path of knowledge well, you will automatically come to certain conclusions. But what happens in real life, of course, is that lots of times people follow that path to a certain point, and then they start making mistakes. And then they can know lots and lots and lots of information about many philosophers and religions and so forth, and end up being bad people anyway. So most people find Plato's judgment about this reasonable for the individual who wants to pursue justice, but not good enough to try to base a government on. Okay. Plato, by the way, agrees with Aristotle that government should foster virtue, but his way of fostering virtue is through education. And that's what I mean by it seems impractical. All right? How do you make people better? By making them smarter. Okay? By giving them more information, by making them thinkers. And for him, that you do that one person at a time. But can you transform a whole nation that way? Can you actually make a whole people that smart? Okay? Now, it's never happened before in the history of mankind. So some deemed his advice a little impractical. Aristotle, his student, you have a reading, by Aristotle, came along and said he didn't agree with everything Plato had to say. Because when it comes to actually developing a working community, one that's really good, basically just, and so forth, you cannot rely upon transforming people into philosophers. And you can't even count on people being smart enough to identify and listen to philosophers. You've got to come up with a much more practical scheme than that. Okay? So Aristotle understood the problems with democracy, but yet he takes the basic idea of democracy and he claims that it is possible for democracy to have virtue under certain circumstances. Okay? First argument he makes, and I want to hear what you think about this, is that if you look at the people as individuals, you will find that most of them have bad judgment, poor judgment. Okay? That you wouldn't want to pluck one out of the crowd, put him in the presidency, and say, rule over us. Okay? But, however, as a whole group, collectively, they have the capacity to make good decisions. Why would that be? Why would it be that as a group they could generally make good decisions? This is a statement of hopefulness about the possibility that democracy can actually produce good results.
Always be more towards the center.
Okay, so if you get the larger the group is, the more moderate the outcome's going to be, because most people will tend towards the center of whatever it is. Mm-hmm.
Well, and people will tend to pick up on each other's mistakes. If you have one person who made a mistake, there's no one there to catch it. But if you have enough people, someone's going to notice.
Very good, right. The more people involved, the more likely inconsistencies are going to be uncovered, injustice is going to be uncovered, bad arguments are going to be exposed. Okay? Aristotle definitely thinks that's a good thing. Okay? Anything else? Any other reason you can think of? Aristotle makes a very practical argument, both about the effectiveness of democracy and its sort of moral acceptability. He says that if the people are involved in governing, they're the ones that are affected by every law that happens. Okay? And so if you have all of the citizens somehow involved, you're more likely to come out with equitable solutions to problems. Just laws that don't hurt at least too many people. Obviously, the majority is still going to be favored in any sort of democracy most of the time over the minority. Okay? But the more people you have involved, the more likely you are to have decisions that reflect their actual needs. And they know best what they need, supposedly. Okay? Aristotle goes so far as to say, the master of the house will be even a better judge than the builder. The master of the house will be a better judge than the builder of the house. Okay? Is that true?
No.
No?
Not if you work construction.
Okay, if you worked in construction?
Yeah.
Okay, why is that wrong?
Don't. Because you don't understand, or generally people that are wanting the house built don't understand what it takes to go into it, the type of materials, the basic structure, the problems you'll get into it, why you can't take out a load-bearing wall, put in windows. I mean, it's just...
This is the better who knows more than they must.
Yeah, I mean,
When it comes to building houses, apparently.
you're generally supposed to trust your contractor. If you have, if you have a decent contractor, you're supposed to trust him instead of nitpicking and trying to make changes yourself.
Sounds like you've had a lot of people trying to nitpick, huh?
Well, my dad's an architect, so he's had problems with people trying to change that too.
Yeah, I mean, the architect and the builders know a lot more about structural integrity, what will keep that house standing and solid. The people, I would assume, are interested in how it looks. Yeah.
As a cook, though, I would have to say that his other argument does stand, because he said that a person eating a meal is going to have a better evaluation of it than the person cooking it. And I would assume that that's true. Even though the cook knows more about what goes into the food and what makes it good, and I could just cry when someone orders a steak because well done. But at the same time, the whole point of cooking food is to please the person that you're serving. And if that person walks away and they did not get what they wanted, then you have failed, no matter how good what you cook for is.
Would that have been a better analogy for Aristotle to use?
He did.
He did use that. Okay, thank you for reminding me. Well, that's a better one than this one, isn't it? And they're different.